Good afternoon. How are you? Well, it's nice out. It looks like it's going to rain, so I'm a little anxious about that. But not too anxious to stop. Thomas Jefferson says we're at 79 to 82, that the humidity is 60%, and the wind is about 7 miles an hour, although I don't feel any wind at all, and I'm at a high point in my area. The profile of the Trump gang is male whites, Christian, highly fascist, uneducated, should rule the earth. And then anybody else who doesn't fit that profile should be assimilated. And that's kind of interesting because the original Native Americans, or Indians, as they were called in the 20s and 30s, and in the 60s, then we changed how we referred to those that we overran who actually were here, who were native. And we want them to be assimilated. When I say we, I am for a moment in a tarnished fashion, only to make a point, speaking as a Trumpian representative, because that's what they think. Now, they can dress it up every way they want, but they run around slandering everyone. Now, I think it's a little interesting to study Native Americans, Indians, as seen through the eyes of Jung, the great Jung. He was a genius, but not a Freudian. And that kind of defined, that opposition defined a large part of his life. But that's, I digress. He was in New Mexico, and he met with the Pueblo Indian sage, Mountain Lake. And I can't say the English name he went by, because I can't remember exactly how to say it. But he spoke for the Taos Pueblo tribe. And I've been out in that area in New Mexico and where the tribes are on several occasions. And the contrast between a place where you would build a bomb that might have blown up the world, and to have the animism and spiritual offerings of the natives in this environment is quite a contrast. And we decided we couldn't live off the grid that way. Water, electricity, but beautiful. So what did he find in his interviews, his discussions with this famed Native American? And Jung's thinking was that the 20s and 30s, there was a time when there wasn't the relativism, if you will. But when there became that, and that is we referred to them as Native Americans, we were insinuating something about the animistic and non-technical culture that was theirs. And the effort, ironically, the new ones on the block over hundreds of years, are trying to shed the Native Americans of their primitive and superstitious ways. And Lake told Jung of their anger, how the whites looked cruel to them. That's what they saw. And the whites were always restlessly seeking something. The Indians, or Native Americans, thought the whites were mad, possessed. Whereas the Native American lived in their hearts, the white man lived in his head. And out of this when Jung was drawing conclusions, he decided that he had a deep hatred of the colonials, which is interesting because we don't. It hasn't worked out that way historically, has it? We did fight the colonies that were America to become independent, but then it's like we learned how to colonize without calling it that. And so we are a people, in Jung's eyes, with a ruthlessness and a lack of regard for our ancestors. Now, some of this is a near miss in my mind, but it came to mind in part because of Vance's notion that the gangs of New York in 1863 reflected the kind of ethnic enclave that shouldn't be allowed to form and that should be instead assimilated. Like all the worst movements on the planet. Australia had its problem, Germany, of course, striking out at people. Now, I don't claim any Irish connection to the gangs, but I do fear the sense that a person even today, with that history behind us, with all the civil rights that occurred, with the Civil War that occurred, that a modern man, meathead, could talk about the struggle in those days between those who were here against those who were coming, and it meant the Irish and the Italian and the Asians. Now, the movie he references is fictional, but it is inspired by a number of real events. And it's one of the greatest confrontational, fictional movies with some resemblance to reality that makes this point about harsh discrimination, resisting the new person. That's who Vance is. That's who Trump is. But it's almost a major admission that a representative of the ticket, as Vice President JD Vance, would go out and, in revisiting an earlier comment about this, double down on it. And even as he's doing that, he's talking about how his wife of a different culture is part of what he believes in. From time to time I've referenced these SAT tests and LSAT and the kinds of tests we take, which says if A is to B is B is to C, and you have to find out what C is. I don't think he could possibly pass that test because he doesn't see, as he's talking, what he's saying. What he's saying is, I endorse discrimination, the assimilation of peoples, anyone who comes here. And where does that end? Food, religion, language, abilities, where you live, how you're approved to live, who fights the wars. This is their entire thing. I think they want more children, and they don't give a damn how endangered they are in terms of health and care, neglect, as long as they could hold a gun in their hands and go expand their fight worldwide. For what? Another crusade of some sort? Or is it really just an imperialism concealed beneath all these crazy views to get people to risk their lives and give up whatever happiness they could have? Okay, so that's a pretty bad picture for me, I think, looking at that. So by contrast, what do we have? Well, we had a very interesting rollout of Kamala Harris's economic program. First of all, she chose an audience more intimate. 250 people were present. She stated her message, which is for families, lower costs. She talked about her overarching policy and opportunity economy. And who was she addressing this to? The middle class. What is she going to do to help the middle class? Well, she answered that too. Price gouging, groceries, and for food, that's going to be at an end. Those who are buying their first home, there'll be arrangements made for the $25,000. The child tax. We are going to credit $6,000 a year. Now, it's a balance. But how does it compare to Jung's analysis of Americans after considering what was happening to Indians? It's not ruthless. It's not disrespectful. It's not colonial. It's accepting us all as part of one national community. It's not nativist. It's inclusive. Now, I suppose many of the maggots who follow Trump believe what he says, need to, want to, have no thoughts of their own, use it as a cover story for, I don't know, a better life for them of hate and discrimination and disquiet. That's what it appears. There are examples that inform our discretion about what's going on that is wrong for Americans, not right. And one of them, and it's a large one, and it's about abortion. Now in Arizona, there's a fight going on, and they want to describe what's going to be on the ballot involving abortion as affecting, and this is the language as I understand it, I haven't read it, but this is the language I understand in the ballot. Unborn human beings. Now, unborn means you're not a being and you can't yet be human. So, is this another example of taking words imprecise to what's going on to mislead voters to say, of course I'm for human beings, and to vote the wrong way? Unborn. So, is your ability to parse a sentence what determines your ability to be a citizen? And if you've had the Kool-Aid and would further compromise perhaps your own rights as a woman and didn't understand what you were doing, how is that an informed and educated nation? I've said before, drawing upon our weatherman, Thomas Jefferson, that a nation that expects to be ignorant and free expects what never was and never will be. Day by day, we're going to see more and more of these lies and attacks and so forth. If our team stands close to the truth and to logic and to the values that are at risk, that must be preserved and protected, that will guarantee us freedom, we have nothing to worry about. But the thing about politics is the beauty of the day with a newborn son is not the same thing as in an election where what appears to be plain and obvious is not perceived or understood that way. So we have to talk to friends, knock on doors, spend $5, $10 if you can. Give time if you can. Not be fooled by the guy who's got that patented medicine sitting in his truck there that promises everything and will give us nothing. It's interesting what pops up in my head sometimes. Somebody has asked me about this and so forth. But you're familiar with the cartoonist kids, which Pinocchio watches other children on an island where they give children everything they want, seemingly, and they turn them into donkeys. That's what Trump is all about. He loves the uneducated. He loves people who would allow him to shoot people in the street. He believes people should forget the crimes he's been convicted of and the funds that he's supposed to disperse. None of that's acceptable. None of us should be taken in by that. For if this man is believed by us, we are the donkeys. But if we advocate for what is common sense, naturally good, conforms with our Constitution, our laws, and our higher angels, if you will, the notion that we get up and out of possible discrimination and the disagreement that is festered, manifested by Trump and his maggots, then we're on our way to barring the door to Trump ever again. But in the meantime, as Harris is glad to say, when we fight, we win. So we must fight, and we shall, every day between now and the election, and we'll win this fight and cashier this bastard and move on with the rest of our national life. So I say goodbye to you until tomorrow, weather permitting, and I'll talk to you then. Bye-bye.